Hi, everybody. This is Bill Kennedy with the Ardan Labs podcast. And today, our very special guest is Nic Jackson. Hey, Nic.
Hey, Bill. How you doing? And thank you so much for having me on as guest.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you finding some time in your incredibly busy schedule to come talk to us for an hour.
Anytime.
So our podcast is really a podcast about you. And we've gotten to meet a few times, and we've done some training and stuff together, but we've never really got a chance to sit down and talk about our histories. And this is going to be that, at least for me, that opportunity. I'm really excited to hear a little bit of your background, because you're one of the people, at least in my life, that I kind of put up there as really technical. And I know that I've got these technical questions, on the systems side and things like that. I got to reach out to Nic. And so I really want to explore, that part of you too, right? Like how did that come about? Where was your interest there? And usually my very first question that I love to ask every guest is to kind of think back on those first kind of memories you have working on a computer, not necessarily playing with it as more as it became a tool or you're being productive with it, something like that.
Probably when I first started to use a computer as a tool would be music production. So I was, as a kind of a kid, you play in bands and not just mucking about at home. And I kind of realized that I could use a computer to record music. And I kind of had played around with early sequencers and things and like the Commodore Amiga and stuff like that. But then I realized you could start using things like Cubase and Cakewalk. And it was like, you got digital samplers and you can do, it was super rudimentary. I mean, you're talking 486 computers like 25 years ago. But I think that was probably the first time I realized a computer wasn't a tool, was a tool and not a toy, which is how I'd kind of seen it growing up.
You dropped the 486. So we're talking like early 90s then when you're sequencing with music, or is it earlier than that?
Yeah, I couldn't remember exactly. Like my first computer, my real computer was a 25 megahertz 486, which had a massive 4 megabytes of RAM. And I think it had like a whopping 120 megabytes hard disk in it. I mean, you're talking cutting edge technology here, like 14-inch CRT display, might have even done 800 by 600. In terms of the screen resolution. And this thing cost me a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. At the time, I think I paid like £1,200. So if you want to do the conversion in dollars, that would have been like $2,500 in the exchange rate of the time. So for somebody who didn't really have I had a job, I was pretty much at college and doing part-time jobs. That cost me a huge amount of my salary, and it was, by retrospect, pretty terrible. It's really less power than you have in an iPhone these days.
Yeah, but see, that's amazing to me, right? So you're in university at this time that you make this massive investment, especially at the time. Like when I'm in university, I'm just trying to keep $20 for Saturday to buy some beer, right? And then trying to figure out where I'm going to get my next $20. But this is a major investment. So what are you studying in university at this time? Are you in computer science and you were like, I need this? Or like, what's going on at the time?
Going into computer science wasn't a straightforward decision for me. I didn't really ever recognize that you could make money working with computers, which is kind of strange because my uncle used to work for IBM, but I just never really sort of realized this. So at the time, the things that interested me were ancient history. So I was really interested in ancient history and archaeology. And what I was thinking was, hey, I'm going to do my A-levels in ancient history and archaeology, and I'm going to go and be an archaeologist. I mean, to say I was heavily influenced by Indiana Jones movies was probably more to the truth than anything. But that's kind of where I was thinking, right? And I was also interested in science. So I was thinking I want to do archaeology, but maybe something on the scientific side, something to do with maybe carbon dating. I didn't really know, right?
What year did you start university, just so we can have kind of a timeline?
about 1819. So it's about 28 years ago, a long time ago. I can't even do the mathematics on that without a calculator. So far, the numbers are too big.
Do you remember what year it was then? Then it's like 1990, or I don't even know what that is.
So music-wise, you're looking at things like the Pixies, Nirvana.
Yeah, like 89.
Yeah, so it was 90s,
89,
right?
90, 91, right? That's when I was in university, right? Okay.
And so originally I was like, I don't know what to do. And I didn't get the grades to do a course in archaeology because like you got to be pretty smart, and I didn't study because I was too busy enjoying myself. So eventually I enrolled in a course to do business studies because I thought, hey, I'm going to be a businessman. That's what everybody wants to be, right? It's kind of like that aspirational thing. And I realized I hated that pretty quickly. And that's when I took like a year pretty much, quit business studies. And I went and took a job at the Environment Agency. And when I was working at the Environment Agency, it was just when everything was starting to get like technological. So the Environment Agency is a government agency in the UK, which looks after river levels and doing flood warning and things like that. So I got a job there. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, hey, Nick, do you know how to use computers, right? And I'm like, yeah. So they gave me this data logger. And it was this little Scion thing. And they're like, do you think you could write a program to connect this up to the remote data loggers? And it was literally as abstract a conversation like that. And I'm like, full of confidence. Oh, yeah, sure, I could do that. And I had no idea what I was doing.
What did you get hired to do? I didn't mean to interrupt there, but what did you get hired to do?
It was predominantly just doing data processing, right? I mean, it was just number entry for the most part. And I kind of was doing that, and it was fine. It was paying pretty good, above minimum wage.
Is that why you took the job? Not because it was the work you wanted to do, because the money?
I just needed a job, right? I mean, I think that was the main thing. And I got super lucky because I found a job for a really good company. And let alone that, there was a lady who was my boss, a lady named Vivian Turner. And she was really just wonderful, right? She was like a massive inspiration. So she would really be patient, and like I was a kid, so I'd be like phoning in on a Monday morning with a sore throat, right? Sore throat, my butt. I'd been boozing all weekend, but she was really tolerant and really supportive, and she would help me and like just gave me so many opportunities. I'm really, really thankful. So it started off just doing the data processing, but then I started working on these river monitoring, like data collection devices for interfacing with the river monitoring and rainfall stations. And it kind of just started doing that. And then I suddenly realized, oh, I really enjoy this. Like, I didn't realize you could use computers and it's a job as well.
Let me ask you one question before you move on. How was the data collected? Because it obviously, well, maybe not obviously, that wasn't happening over cell phones.
No, there was no phone.
So were devices, so how did you get the data in your hands from these devices out in the field?
Yeah, well, so originally, right, what would happen is a field agent would drive out to one of these remote data stations in the middle of the countryside. They would plug their laptop in to these remote loggers over an RS-232, which is the big old square thing that probably looks more like you connect a printer up to or something, an RS-232 connector, and they would just download it. Now, the problem with the laptops was the batteries were rubbish because it was early laptops. They were heavy. They weren't waterproof. They were expensive, and they were just always breaking down. So the intention was that they needed a better way. So they bought these they were actually Scion devices. I don't know if you remember those, but they were like little pocket computers. But they were specifically designed so they were waterproof, and you could literally, like IPv6, you could drop them in a stream and they'd be fine. And the batteries, I've got a feeling they just used like 4 AA batteries. So you could just change the batteries in them. So the engineers loved them because they were no hassle. Keep your laptop if you want to do some email or something like that. But when you're in the field, you just use this thing because it never broke on you. So that was originally how they do it. They literally started to modernize, and obviously now it's all automated and stuff like that. But you even today in some of those remote river stations, you'll struggle to find like a cell phone reception, or you'll really struggle the expense to put a fixed line in for a phone or something like that. I got super lucky. I got super lucky because I ended up working with Vivian. I got super lucky because I knew how to computer, and I was one of the few people at the time. And ultimately what that did was that made me realize that I could do this as a job, and it was something that I loved to do. And that's when I started to kind of, I suppose, follow things more seriously and went back, finished my degree in computer science.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you've got this good paying job for where you're at. You're learning, you found your passion here. I was wondering if you went back to university and finished that degree, were you able to continue to work there at the same time? You were doing both?
You know, they were amazing. They let me, I was doing like part-time, I think. I couldn't tell you how many hours a week, but I mean, university in the UK it's not a huge amount of hours per week. It was like probably 15 to 20, like maximum in terms of taught lectures. Everything else is, you know, self-study. So I'd pretty much do a full day. I'd either be at university or I was at work. And luckily the university I went to, Northumbria, was literally just down the road from the Environment Agency's office. So I could jump back in between classes and stuff some days. And that was great, right? Because it meant that I could support myself whilst I was at university, and I could learn at the same time. And they were really, really good to me. I've got a lot of thanks to give to the Environment Agency and to Vivian.
Now, the work you're doing at the Environment Agency is really software development, right? You're massaging data. You're doing data science. I tell everybody everything we do is data science, really, at the end of the day. I mean, you're doing real data science there in terms of getting these raw data files, and I'm assuming preparing them for whatever reports. Or what kind of databases were they using back then too? You must have been loading that up into databases.
It was proprietary. It was a piece of software called Hydrolog, and I could be wrong about. I hope I'm not wrong about that. Hydrologic was the company anyway. It was a UK-based company, and it was a proprietary database. And the Hydrolog software was specifically, it just allowed you to interrogate the numbers, to be able to kind of like what would be kind of to do bucket analysis on them as well, and to kind of like reduce the sort of the cardinality to analyze the data over long periods of time, and to be able to do things like graphing and plotting multiple data sets against the graphs. A lot of the analysis was still done very, very manually. So part of the job that I used to do was I would print charts for the hydrologists, and the hydrologists would sit and look at the charts, and they were literally, you know, looking for trends on the charts. There wasn't a way that you could kind of write some queries in R or something like that and kind of be able to sort of pull out or automatically analyze anomalies like you could these days.
So when you get back to university, you're taking a software track at that point, and you're finishing. And what are you thinking about now as you're finishing your degree? Because you've got this great job, right? But I have to imagine at this point you want to do more as you're coming out of university. So what's happening there?
So I think life kind of threw another curveball. So my intention was I really loved working for the Environment Agency. I loved kind of living in the north of England as well, because it was, you know, it's a beautiful place, and I had the opportunity that I'd be out in the countryside and stuff like that, and I was really interested in the direction that was going on at the Environment Agency, because there was this thing called the internet, which all of a sudden started to crop up, and that fascinated me, like literally fascinated me, the ability to kind of have this communication. And I'd always kind of like dug that, you know, like played around with CB radios and stuff when I was a kid, and we kind of would do like LAN parties and stuff in the early days of computing. But being able to like remotely connect machines over telephone lines, I found just like mind-blowingly fascinating. So I got a phone call one day, and it was from from a recruitment agent. I don't remember how they got my details, but ultimately it was, would I be interested in interviewing for a company called Lost Boys in Amsterdam? And Lost Boys was one of the media or new media agencies in working in Amsterdam. So the opportunity was there that I go and work in Amsterdam. I work for a great company, and the pay was more money than I've ever seen in my entire life, right? I mean, like as a young kid in his 20s, this was just crazy money. So I'm like, hang on, so I can go and live in another country? I'm like, yes. And I can earn a lot of money? They're like, yes. And I'm like, and I'm doing a job building stuff for the internet? I'm like, yes. I'm like, sign me up. I mean, seriously, right? Like, so I had my girlfriend. I had a girlfriend in the UK at the time, and I'm like, I'm moving to Amsterdam, and it was pretty much a decision as easy as that. So I graduated. I had my graduation party, and the following day, I was on a plane to Amsterdam. I had probably about £200 in my pocket. I had no accommodation. I had a laptop, a pile of books, and some clothes. And literally that's all I had.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I got too many questions right now. Yeah. What did your girlfriend say when you said you're moving? Did she, I imagine she had a life where you were. Did she move with you, or was it over? Like, that was it?
So I'm now, it's a little bit unfair. I think when I said I'm moving, it wasn't like, hey, I'm moving. It was like, there's this opportunity. And so it was originally, we can do this and live in a different country and experience a different culture. But she was studying law, and it just like, she wanted to move to London. So that's what happened there. So I moved to Amsterdam. She moved to London. And eventually, it kind of, everything fell apart. But I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, because, again, I met so many people who were like, helped me along my way. So there was a chap from Yorkshire called Paul Etchells who I was working with, and he was a super smart engineer, and like I learned so much from him. And I was working with all of these really talented sort of professional software engineers. I'm a blagger, right? I'm not a professional software engineer. I've just left college. And we got all of these like professional software engineers. I just got, it was a learning curve. Like, there was a learning curve on a number of things. One was, you can't just move to another country and find a flat to live in. And you can't do that with £200. So, like, for the first, I would say, month, I was living in this hellhole of a hotel, and it was the only place that I could afford. And it was 18 guilders a night, which was about £7 or something. And there were mice, and there was graffitis on the wall, and it was shed. I mean, it was a hovel. It was a total slum, right? But it didn't matter, because I could afford to live there, and B, that wasn't important. The important thing was I was working, I was learning, sort of assimilating this whole new culture as well of different country, which was just mind blowing.
Your parents, were your parents involved at that point? Did you tell them what you were doing? I'm curious what their feedback was, because I remember I was going to do something similar, and my mom was like, you can't do that. You don't have the means to do something like that, right? And that can have a big influence on that decision. I
don't remember. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I would have had the conversation with them. I wasn't living at home at the time, but I'm pretty sure my dad would have thought that I had rocks in my head. And I probably didn't even tell him that I didn't have any accommodation sorted out, because he definitely would have thought I had rocks in my head, because he would have realized that you can't, it's not just as easy as turning up in a new country. And they were ultimately supportive of, I was finding the thing that I loved to do. And that was the important thing, right? So for them, they would support that. However, it was, they've always been like super like laid back, and like, they're your mistakes to make. It's like, we'll kind of pick you up when you make them. But it's important I think, to make those mistakes. You learn.
But I think you must have had in your head, like, I just have to get through the first 4 weeks, because at that point I got a big paycheck coming and I can deal with it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was hard, right? I mean, so I barely had enough money to eat. Thankfully, the company that I was working for, they did free lunches. So, like Google weren't the ones to invent the free lunch. It predates a lot of that. So they did free lunches. So basically, if they didn't do free lunches, I wouldn't have ate, because I literally only had enough money for to pay the hotel bill and nothing else. So I really needed that first paycheck. And in retrospect, I'll be honest with you, I'm really pleased that I didn't know how the world operated, because I didn't have the money. I probably wouldn't have taken the job and gone over there, because I didn't have the money to rent a flat, and I didn't have the money to do this, because I was ignorant of all of that.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
Right. I'm not lying to you, honestly. Like, I didn't even have a hotel booked, right? I got off a plane at Schiphol Airport. I took a train to downtown Amsterdam. I walked into a bunch of hotels, realized I really didn't have the money to pay for those, because I couldn't, again, there was no internet. I couldn't have just looked up the prices on the internet beforehand, right? I could have done some research if I was smart, but I wasn't. And I remember walking around the streets of Amsterdam and thinking, I'm going to sleep in the park tonight because I don't have anywhere to stay. And look, it was summer, so when I spotted this place, which was called the Hotel White House, Hotel de Withuis, and it looked like a total dump. And literally, I spotted it, and I'm like, I can afford to stay there. I'm sure I can. And I was right. But if you don't mind the mice and the dirt and the graffiti and the other residents,
I imagine this has stayed with you forever, and it's influenced you in ways of when you meet other people that maybe you connect with that are in the similar. You want to help them a little bit more, right? Like, talk about some of that.
I think so. I think the ultimate thing about like hindsight is that when you've been through experiences yourself, it definitely gives you empathy towards others who have similar experiences. I was from a working class background. We didn't grow up with, we weren't broke, but we didn't have huge amounts of money, big houses and flash cars. It was very modest. I think it does in some ways. Ultimately, I was just raised and brought up to give a darn about other people. It was something that my parents were like. They were very much like that. They would always be helping people out, even though they didn't have a huge amount themselves. It was just the way that people were, I think. And I suppose that's where I got it from, more so than my own misadventure.
I'm not going to say I was at the extreme level you were at, but I when I was in university, had to decide sometimes what I was going to eat and what day I was going to eat, right? Because my parents didn't have means either, and I couldn't really go to them. I had 4 other sisters too, and I didn't want to go to them, right? So I think that's influenced me with this idea that it destroys me when somebody can't access something they need, not want, but need because of money. Like, I hate money, to be honest with you. I just hate the whole idea of it in terms of need.
So for me, right, it's this, and I think that it's about opportunity, and for me, I think I'm not against billionaires being billionaires. Like, for the most part, billionaires have earned where they've got to. They've had an idea, they've had a unique, they've worked hard. Like, I don't care about that. The thing for me is that everybody should have the opportunity, if they so choose, to do that. And I think this is what's great about the industry that we work in, because knowledge is the commodity. You don't necessarily need money, you just need the knowledge. And knowledge is also really, really free to give to people. It costs you nothing to give knowledge to somebody else. It's no hardship on my family, and it's no hardship on me. It's not like I'm keeping industrial secrets. And I think that's really important. And that's, I try my best. I always try that if I learn something to share that, because if it helps one more person, then that's a good thing. And when it comes to, I think, being able to get people to raise themselves up, if you can equip them with the knowledge, enable them to get that first job or to get that promotion, to be able to help themselves, then that's wonderful. That's just leveling up society. And
yeah, I agree. You can't just give people everything. But I think time is worth more than money sometimes. Like, and to help that person, you have to give your time. Like, so it's not really free, right? Like, you can do whatever you want in the next hour. That's your choice. How are you going to spend the next hour of your life?
You got to think about time as well, right? And I'll be honest with you, I waste plenty of time. Like, don't get me wrong. I could literally just spend an hour twiddling with something, and it'll be gone. Like, all right, I play a video game or something like that for an hour. So I think it's about sort of looking at the time that you have, and I think when people waste a lot more time than they realize. So I mean, I think that, the key thing is you should spend time with your families, and you should spend time with the people that you love, and that's like that's what you should do. That's life. But I think when I look at it and I'm like, do I really need to watch that show on the TV? Or I could maybe spend 30 minutes helping somebody out. And I think that's kind of like the balance for me. I don't watch a huge amount of TV and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's always time if you look hard enough, and it doesn't take much. Like, literally, this is what I kind of like say to a lot of people, is like, you will know something that somebody else doesn't. And if you spend 20 seconds answering a question on Stack Overflow or wherever it may be, that can massively help somebody to move forward. They might have been stuck in a rut for ages. And so you don't have to spend a huge amount of time either.
I always say 4 hours a week can change the world. 4 hours a week. If everybody gave just 4 hours, right? 4 days, 1 hour a day, right, of the business week, and you get the other one off, you would absolutely change the world. I was actually having this conversation with my fiance this weekend, because we were just drop dead on Saturday, and we just were watching TV all day. And I looked at her and I said, I feel guilty right now because I'm just not being productive. And she said, Bill, there are times where you really literally need to shut down for a day as well. Like, if you're not doing that, you're not going to be effective either.
She's a real smart lady. And that is, that's very, very true. I think, I don't know why the thing in the airplane sticks in my mind, but where it's like, put your own mask on before you put the mask on the baby type thing. Sometimes, like, if you burn out, you can't help anybody. And I think this is the other thing that, like, I don't know if it's just me, but I find this industry, it can be really exhausting sometimes. I mean, like, it's really difficult to switch off, specifically when you're dealing with a complicated problem. Like, the amount of times I've woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning, got out of bed and went downstairs to my computer because I've just figured out what my problem was. And 9 times out of 10, it's something stupid. But like, the key thing about that is that my brain's not sleeping. It's continually kind of running through a problem, and it can be really tiring as well. Like, I think this pandemic for me has been really weird, considering it's like so much time where I haven't had to do half the things that I've ordinarily had to do. I've just found it exhausting, like mentally exhausting.
What happens to me, and my fiance is learning it now, is she'll see me sitting on the couch just staring into space, and she's like, what are you doing? And I go, everything I can not to get on the computer, because if I get on the computer right now and I get into that zone, we're going to lose 4 or 5 hours. And she knows it. She sees when I'm intense, and she's just like, okay, I lost Bill for the last 4 or 5 hours. It's the same kind of thing, right? Like, I want to solve this problem, no matter how long it takes.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. Like, that's actually one of the things that I find really appealing about working in sort of with computer science and computer industry. Like, I genuinely enjoy the problem solving. Like, when stuff's easy, it's like, it's great. But I really like the stuff where I just can't figure out why something doesn't work. And you've got to do the reason. You're digging into it, and I find that fascinating.
So let's get back to this job in Amsterdam now. So how long were you at that job?
Well, I was living in Amsterdam for 8 months. Well, maybe more, actually. It may be closer on to a year, I think, or just shy of. And then what I did was they opened an office in London. So I had the opportunity to go work for them in London. So I moved. That was the plan. And that was when I actually got, while I was waiting for them to set up their office in London, I was approached by a company called Razorfish. And they were a big global new media agency as well. And sadly, a lot of these great companies kind of disappeared during the dot-com boom bust. But, again, some great people. And I remember working with some really, really just absolutely fascinatingly intelligent people. And so I ended up working for them instead of Lost Boys because I was selfish, right? I mean, I was hungry as well. I wanted to achieve. I wanted to kind of work my way up and learn and being the only developer in the UK office. I'm not going to learn that way. I've got to be working with people smarter than me. And Razorfish afforded that opportunity because it was like the brightest sort of people in the industry. And I was like, I'd be foolish to turn that down.
Did you not like Amsterdam that you were thinking going back to London? Is this Razorfish, you say, are they in London or are they in Amsterdam?
So they were in London. So I really liked Amsterdam. I thought it was such a really pleasant city. The thing I love about the Netherlands in general is just how welcoming the Dutch people are. I mean, it literally blew my mind that I would go out for a drink with 6 Dutch people and they would speak English, even if I was not part of the conversation. They would speak English between themselves so that I was included, so that I could join the conversation if I wanted to. And that blew my mind, right? I've never seen that before. So, and the architecture, and it's such a beautiful city, and the food is great, and but ultimately what I found myself doing was I was flying back to the UK every weekend, every other weekend, and it was just draining, and sort of trying to figure out whether to set up a life in the UK or whether into London, and it was just kind of really, really draining. So eventually I sort of decided that London was going to be the place where I would be, and we try and make a life there. And as I say, it all fell apart, but in everything in retrospect, if it hadn't, I wouldn't have met my wife, et cetera, et cetera.
But why were you flying back?
Because I had a flat in London and a flat in Amsterdam, and my girlfriend at the time was living in London. So I wanted to kind of spend time in as well. I was living alone in Amsterdam, and you can't go out for drinks every night with friends. And I don't really like living alone. I'll be honest with you. It's sometimes I like peace and quiet, but I quite like, I'm a sociable person sometimes. So I didn't really enjoy kind of living my own as well. And when you don't have any friends or family and stuff like that around you so much. So when the opportunity came up to kind of do the same job, but in a city where I've got sort of friends and family, then that's pretty impressive. Plus, London's a hell of a city. I've traveled a lot, and I think London is one of the greatest cities on the planet. I mean, you've got everything. You've got theater, you've got music, you've got great nightlife, you've got sort of museums and art and culture, and as a kid in your 20s, when you get the opportunity to live in a city like that, and you've got a few quid in your pocket to be able to enjoy yourself, it's a beautiful place to live.
I'm with you.
Really exciting.
I grew up in New York, but I am fascinated by London. But when people that I meet grew up in London, they're fascinated by New York. It's like these two cities kind of compete for that top spot. But I totally hear you.
Yeah, New York too. I mean, New York's a very special city, and it's just kind of, I think it's just, there's a vibe, right? And Amsterdam was lovely. I mean, I would never say it was exciting, but I thought London was exciting, right? I mean, you go out to a club or a bar or something like that, and So I don't regret. I mean, evidently not. I've been here for like 22 years now. So it's a pretty nice place to live. But yeah, that's pretty much how it kind of started.
All right. So how long are you at this company and what are you doing there? Is it anything new or different, or it's the same kind of stuff, just in a different environment?
Yeah, so it's pretty much the same kind of stuff. So the internet at the time was predominantly like front end driven. It was kind of like interface developer, I believe my title was at the time. So I was predominantly building HTML. I don't even remember if CSS was a thing.
This has to be around 2002, 2004, you think?
99, 2000. But it was interesting, right? I mean, I remember the first project that I was working on, and again, this is like heavily influences me, is I was working on a project at Razorfish, and what we were doing was we were building a user interface for a set-top box for Italian TV. And the Italian TV were like doing this prototype of basically TV on demand over the internet, right? Or over cable. And we built the user interface in HTML on a customized Netscape browser. And that abuse of the technology really interested me. You can take this material and you don't just have to use it for building websites. You can bend it and you can manipulate it to do other things, like using HTML for UI on set-top boxes. That was pretty far out there in sort of the year 2000.
No, way out there. I mean, really looking at, and the networks really weren't ready. The browsers really weren't ready. The tech wasn't ready. How far did you get with that project?
I mean, it was a prototype. I don't recall actually what sort of happened. That was one of the things about working at a company like Razorfish. You tended to move around projects. So your internal teams, and you'd go in, you'd do some work on it, and then you'd be off on a different project. So I don't know what happened to it. I'll be honest with you. Like, I think what we did was great, but I think in retrospect, due to the limitations of the technology, like, the hardware of the machines and things like that, and the bandwidth, it probably was the right product at the wrong time.
Yeah, a lot of things had to still be invented too. You probably didn't have the encoders and the decoders for the video. You had to figure all that out.
So interestingly, there was a company, I don't know if they're still kicking around, but like, do you remember Real Player?
I think so.
So like Real Player, I think they had a video encoding piece of software as well, but certainly they had audio encoding. It was the kind of tech that you don't miss, but it was revolutionary for the time. I mean, it was incredible that somebody did this then, right?
And you had to be more efficient with what you were doing with that tech and the algorithms, right? Like, that gets super interesting, right? We can be a little bit lazier today.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. At the time, you had to be super efficient, because if you didn't write the HTML in a really optimized way, the computer, the destination, would just crumble. I mean, your people were running it on terrible computers. The bandwidth, if you were running like 56K modems, so you're looking like 3K a second or something as like a downstream. You've got to be super optimized in what you're sending to the browser as well. You kind of everything had to be hyper optimized, and then there was the complexities as well, because there was no standardization between sort of the different browsers. Like, Netscape was different from Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer on the Macintosh was totally different from Internet Explorer on Windows, which literally just blew my mind, how like IE5 on a Mac used a total different box model to kind of like IE5 on Windows. The differences between like the JavaScript accessors, like, one's using get element by ID, one's like document.all, like how I even remember that pain.
Because it was painful. I remember some of it. And I was the same way. I was like, what's going on here? Why is this not working in the other browser? Oh my God.
Half your code was like if user agent equals. I mean, that was like,
But wasn't that the best thing about jQuery at the time when it came out? Like,
oh my word. I mean, seriously, like jQuery revolutionized the absolutely revolutionized the world, because they did something really, really smart, which was they took the differences between the different object models, different box models, and they just kind of put a standardization on it. It just made it accessible. You didn't need a degree in astrophysics to be able to write a web page that ran across a bunch of different environments anymore. You could just use jQuery, and it was actually so sane. So like, massive props to the jQuery authors for doing that. It was brilliant.
I agree. They saved my life. They saved my life because I was coding on IE, thinking I'm coding in a browser. I had no idea. Had no idea at the time. All right, so how long are you at Razorfish, and then what happens from there?
So Razorfish was well, unfortunately, the .com bust happened, and Razorfish was a big company, which was basically all of their work just dried up. So they had an opportunity internally where people had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy, and I needed a deposit for a house, and voluntary redundancy was that deposit for a house. So I decided to leave there, took voluntary redundancy, and probably took the most interesting role in my career, and the one which literally set my life up, which was working for a little agency out of West London called State Digital, and it was a little 4-person agency. I was working for them, and I was kind of like lead designing the system. They were producing software for the events industry, which, like, as an industry is not massively interesting to me, but the complexity of the technology and what they want to do, I'm like, I could really see how I could abuse and bend some of this modern technology to do some interesting stuff. And like, most importantly, my future wife worked in the office next door. So like, when you start to look at like the whole synergies of like why things happen in life, not going to say any of those decisions were wrong, because they kind of led me to where I am.
And how long were you there? That's now like, you're there for like, I'm imagining now you're going to be there for a few years. You're enjoying that work. There's a lot of work to do. You're a small shop. You got to kind of experience the startup. Yeah,
I was there for a good few years, and we had a great time as well. Like, it was a really sort of friendly. We'd go out, we'd go for drinks and food and stuff, and so I really, really enjoyed working with the folks there.
You got the tech working.
Yeah, the tech was great,
I imagine. But so now you're doing both software. So you're doing both software and operations at this point, I imagine, because it's such a small shop. You're doing everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was also doing some server-side programming at the time as well with like PHP and ASP. But this was like the first real thing, because what we were building is software as a service. Because we built a platform that people could embed into their websites. So I kind of like, I figured out a way that if I abused JavaScript includes, then what I could do is I could actually render our server-side platform inside of somebody's website. So you would literally just put a JavaScript include in your front-end page, and all of the exhibitor lists and the floor plans and things like that were rendered on our server, but they were kind of sent through the abuse of JavaScript includes. And so we were running a back-end server, and we had like multi-tenant and multiple clients. And I literally remember one of the first kind of like things I did, which was like an opsy thing, I suppose. And that was the server kept running out of memory. And there was no metrics or monitoring, but we kind of roughly worked out that once a day this thing would run out of memory. So I wrote a little application which just rebooted the server every night at midnight. And because we were localized to Europe, it solved the memory leak. And a little bit further down the road, I realized why the server was running out of memory, and it was because I was actually leaking memory in my my ActiveX COM object, but which I fixed. But it was just interesting, right? I mean, it was just like you just did everything that needed to be done to get the job done, and we were really successful. Like, we'd cornered the market, and it was a great piece of technology for the time. I remember writing an image resizing service in Java servlets using JAI, Java something imaging library, because you had to, because there was no like image resize API. So you had to build your own. And that was like super interesting as well. So you're maintaining, we were running microservices, I suppose, kind of ahead of its time. We had the floor plan generation application, we had the exhibitor list application, and we had the image manipulation app. And did we do that deliberately because we saw that this is kind of like decoupled, decentralized application technology? It was like, no, we didn't, because we had bits of stuff in kind of Cold Fusion, bits of stuff in ASP, and bits of stuff in Java. We were basically just using whichever technology allowed us to perform the task that we wanted. So it just worked.
The best tool for the job, which happened to be different tech. Yeah.
And again, it was ignorance, right? I mean, didn't know any better. So we just kind of had a good guess and moved along.
I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's engineering at a productivity level, right? We got to get this thing done. That thing already gave us 80% of it. Why, so I don't think it's ignorant. I think it's the right engineering, definitely at the time.
Yeah.
So what happens now? Like you're at this place for a few years and you met your wife there. What causes you to move on from this company? What's the next one?
Well, so she had her own business. So she's a mathematician, statistician. She'd been running her own business, which was doing data processing and statistical analysis. And the industry that she was working in was the motor industry. So she was working with a lot of on projects which would kind of do the assessments of prototype vehicles for the big motor manufacturers. So originally this was a paper-based industry, and she had this idea, and she was like, why can't we like make this digital? And we were just having a conversation one day, and she's like, do you think you could make this digital? Like, is it possible? And I kind of sat down and I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I've got an idea of how something could work. We could build a system. So she had a guy working with a chap named Nic, conveniently, brilliant engineer, really smart guy. And so we just sat down and we were just like, well, if we did this and we did this, we think we could like build this platform which would replace the pen and paper, and it would allow change. And change was the major sort of thing, right? It was always like everything was last minute. Everything needed to be changed really quickly. You can't reprint several thousand paper-based questionnaires really quickly. And then you've got to like data enter them manually. And then there's the accuracy problems. Well, that all goes away if you just have the sort of the digital source in the first place. So we built this system. We learned a lot by building the first version of the system. And we sort of learned and built the second version of the system. And eventually I went to work with my wife full time. And we kind of then migrated the system to the third version, which was moving it on to iPads and Android devices. And it was just super, super interesting. And, getting to work for yourself, traveling the world, really, really great piece of software. It was like your own architect. It was hard work. I mean, like it was hard work, but it was really rewarding at the same time because it was so many different component parts and so many different interesting things to learn. I mean, I learned how to sort of program C++ and how to kind of program Objective-C for iOS, and again, still building the back-end technologies in .NET, which worked really great. And then all of the weird little side things like learning how Wi-Fi works and sort of thinking about the architectural problems of how to build an application that is fault tolerant, because you're running Wi-Fi in these large exhibition halls. Wi-Fi really wasn't very good. Like, the people would do stuff, like literally the amount of times I'd have somebody would just unplug everything, and like, well, my Wi-Fi would go down, all my computers would go down, just because somebody's just pulled out a cable on the other side of the room. And you're just like, so you have to build all of this problem into the system. And that's where it starts to get interesting, because you got to think about, how can I ensure that the system works when the server is not connected? You can't just have 50 or 100 people stop dead, because timelines are so tight. Got to keep rolling, and people want their data. They want to do the analysis and get it.
So you were literally touching this project touched every type of device, every layer of computing, with all the fault tolerance in these pretty hostile environments. But so that's huge, because that understanding and background of all that tech helps with your complete understanding, I have to imagine, moving forward. And you're still married. So how was it working with your wife for those years, right? Because
it was great.
It was good.
Yeah. I mean, you always have, it's natural to have, say, disagreement and debate. That's healthy, I think. It's difficult to have a disagreement at work and not take things home. So sure, we have like fair share of arguments, but it's been 18 years, so it's obviously nothing too disastrous, I think, from that regard. I think it's about tolerance, and I think my wife is probably the most tolerant person that you're ever likely to meet.
You're wearing two hats with her. You have a business partner and you have your wife, right? And I have a business partner who I love to death, and we don't argue anymore, right? Like, we learned after 5 years that nothing's personal, and we don't have to worry about each other. We can have a disagreement. We can even get loud, but it's never personal. But I do get to go home and separate myself from the business, right? And you don't. So that to me is interesting, because it's difficult when you don't have the escape that you sometimes need.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I'll just like absorb myself into a problem. So I don't really like to switch off, if you know what I mean. Like, when I'm kind of thinking about something, when I'm trying to work something out, I'm quite happy that it just consumes me permanently. And actually, I probably work my best that way. And if anything, when I'm stopped from doing that, that's when I get like irritable, because I find that I just can't switch off. I'm constantly trying to think about something. I just want to solve the problem and then get on. But I think it was good. I mean, like, the business was doing really well. We were having a lot of fun, and it was, we were employing people as well, and that was great. Being able to like give people a start in life as well. So everything was pretty good. I mean, wouldn't change a thing for a world.
All right, so we got 12 minutes left, and there's still a bit I want to cover. What happens to this business? You've got employees, it's growing, the tech is working. What happens that the business, or at least you walk away from the business, or is the business now gone? So
it was really sad. And we went from thinking we were going to open up an office in probably Los Angeles, and we were looking at how we can kind of figure out how to kind of maintain like a European office in London, and open up an office in LA to be able to serve the American market, because traveling back and forth was costly, and it was very time consuming and draining. And then the recession happened, and one of the things that got hit really heavily was the automotive sector. So we got hit really heavily from the automotive sector, and the work almost disappeared. I mean, it completely dried up.
Is this 2008, 2009?
Something like that, yeah. It was the big global recession. I mean, It was like the subprime mortgage recession.
Yeah, that was that time, 2008.
And the other thing that had a real big problem was we did a lot of work for the UK government as well, and the UK government went into austerity. So they totally clamped down. So we just kind of let all of the work just dried up. and you kind of try and do bits and pieces, but we were really specialized, so it was kind of difficult. So we took some time and actually thought, let's take this as an opportunity and let's do some re-architecture on the software, and let's think about, can we actually market the software as an independent entity and sell software rather than selling the service. And that was a big thought, but it was just really difficult. And I think we kept things going. My wife only retired from the business a couple of years ago, so it kept going for a long time after that. But I think like the thing that I love to do, the work was disappearing. So I decided that like if I go take a job working for another company, then it helps sort of see I don't then take a salary from the business. It lowers the risk on us as a family because we've got an external income. And ultimately I wanted to do software engineering, and I was kind of missing that. I find myself when I don't have a focus, if I don't have a drive or a kind of a deadline, I'm just not like really productive. So if you give me like 12 months to go and do something without really any deadline, I'll probably spend 11 months like walking around the problem and then spend the last month kind of just cramming. So yeah, I moved on and went to work for I'm trying to think who I was working for. I think it was a local company called the Listening Company, who was a contract. They provide external services for contact center, and they had an internal piece of software which they wanted somebody to come in and do some engineering work, and I was running the engineering teams over there as an engineering manager.
Now, what I want to get to, we got like 8 minutes left here. I know you as somebody who is an educator, whether that's at a conference, doing a talk, or doing workshops. I feel like we have very similar backgrounds in the fact that we're doing all of this software development and some similar stuff around the same time. And maybe we both somehow transition into being an educator. I want to know how that happened in the last kind of 8 minutes we have. And did you always have a passion for that too?
I think it was something that I found. So I started doing, I worked for a couple of companies. I was doing engineering management. So I wasn't a software engineer as such anymore. I was doing sort of running engineering teams and head of engineering and things like that. And ultimately what I discovered from doing that was that the thing that I enjoyed the most was being able to help people. And I found that was when actually I was probably the most use. I could kind of bring my technical interests and knowledge and be able to kind of help people to get along and help the organization as well. Like the stuff that I really didn't enjoy so much was, just things like holiday approvals, right? I'm just like, why'd you pay me to approve somebody's holidays? I'd never understood that. Like, I could not understand why an organization wanted me to spend my time and my money doing something such simple as approving holiday requests and expenses. And ultimately I didn't. I used to just give people my password and I was just like, just approve your own holidays and your own expenses. Like, just don't tell anybody. I trust you. But I think that was really interesting to me. And then, so I worked for a couple of companies and I had that's when I started to really take this as a mindset of something that I could do as a job, because I didn't think it was a job, right? And I had the fortunate opportunity that I could move into a role in a job that I was working in where I was spending my time helping people just with the best practices of writing software and like helping out teams and kind of just going in and helping them solve problems, not having to do things like approve holidays and deal with sort of skirmishes, for want of a better word, between different people, and kind of like not that I hated doing that or I was bad at it. It was just if I could concentrate on one thing. And that ultimately made me realize that I was never going to do engineering management or people management or anything like that ever again in my entire life, because I didn't have to do it. Because there was another option. And ultimately that's what led me to working at HashiCorp, and through love of sort of distributed systems development and actually as a user of their tools, which I really loved, and the kind of the user experience and the mentality that went into them and how they worked really resonated. I was genuinely fortunate to get a role at HashiCorp as a developer advocate, and it was literally I spotted the job advert when I was doing some research on, I think I was working out how to like deploy AWS Lambda with Terraform, and I'm like, oh, HashiCorp are hiring. And I clicked on the link and it's like, oh, developer advocate, what's that all about? I'm like, oh, well, that sounds like exactly what I do and what I really enjoy doing. And I really love their tools. So I wonder if they'd consider me. So I just emailed them, never heard anything, totally forgot about it. I get a phone call one day from Arman, and Arman's like, hey, I'm in London. Sorry, we're a small company. We did see your advert, but would you like to meet up for coffee and have a chat about the role? And I was like, great, I'll be there in an hour and a half. So I dashed across London, went and met Arman for coffee, who I didn't even really know who he was, got on really great with him. It turns out, I genuinely think that both Mitchell and Arman are like genius. They're just their like thought process is just mind-blowing to me. And the opportunity to work for that company was literally beyond my wildest dreams, right? I mean, like the fact that I can work for this company that I respect, for these people who I think are just incredibly intelligent, incredibly of the right mindset, and that I get the opportunity to help people and get paid for it.
And you were one of the first. Were you one of their first DevRels then?
No, so Seth was the first developed DevRel, and he went on to work in engineering at Google. But it was predominantly, so it was originally, it was me and Seth. We were, I suppose you would say, permanent developer relations. And Mitchell and Arman would obviously do a huge amount of developer relations. Like, they're out at conferences and talking. I mean, they created the products, and they were still working on the product, and Mitchell still does contribute to the sort of the production code base. And check out the commits, and you'll see that. And Arman too as well. But it was kind of like the four of us as a small group. But the intention was that the developer relations group would grow. So yeah, I was kind of like the second DevRel, or technically the fourth DevRel, because if you think the original was Mitchell and Arman.
So I'm curious, because you were on a management path before this. Did you end up taking a salary cut to do this, or everything was still competitive, even though it was a different?
So that was the thing, right? Because the world changed. So at the time, like literally, and I've never agreed with this, but at the time, the only way you could earn more money was you had to go into management. And I never understood it. I'm like, well, why can't management and engineering are different? It's different skills. One's not lesser than the other. Why does a manager get paid more than an engineer? I don't think it's so much true now, but certainly then it was, right? It was literally, there was a very predefined career path. And I wanted a nicer house, and I wanted a newer car. So to do that, you've got to earn more money, and there's only really one way to do it, and that was engineering management. But at the time, then things started to pivot, and I think the kind of the role of individual contributor started to be recognized, and it was realized that probably because of the expansion of engineering, that an engineer could get paid the same as a manager. So it made it available to me. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I could have taken the pay cut. I mean, I could have done, but I like where I live, and I like sort of all of those things. So I would probably have sacrificed if and continued along the sort of the engineering sort of leadership route if I hadn't been able to take the sidestep.
Oh, so that's fantastic. Yeah, I know my whole career, and I had kids when I was really, really young. Like, I wanted to make moves. I wanted to do this. But, I mean, when you got mouths to feed and you have to, sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do, and you got to stay where you want to stay. I feel like you and I have had a very similar track and some other similar constraints. Here's my last question.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much of a software engineer you were, because when I met you, you were doing a lot of operational stuff, and you were talking about how to deploy things. And it's fascinating that I just didn't realize it. So have you done any engineering on the products over there at HashiCorp as part of this job? I have to imagine that you would be a real asset to that, since you're using the tools all the time.
I mean, it's very limited. I mean, you'll find commits of mine in a bunch of different products. I will help out where I can. I would say it's less so now because the organization's bigger and more formal than it used to be. But I think it's about sort of the specialization. So from a DevRel perspective, you can provide the feedback, and maybe that's the most effective use of your time, rather than sort of going direct. So I think that's kind of like one of the things that we do. I think like engineering and product at HashiCorp are pretty good. I mean, not pretty good. I mean, that's being modest. That I think they're really good about kind of trying to figure out what the direction should be. And, everywhere you don't always get it right first time, but I think it's about sort of trying to provide the insight around the use of the tool, such as, from simple things like, well, you have to deploy it in this particular way, and then there's this catch-22 that you need to get the key before you can launch the service, and et cetera, and that causes friction with this, et cetera, et cetera. Being able to kind of provide that feedback and kind of have hopefully the little inputs and minor little tweaks into the product is helpful. But I think mostly it's about letting people get the best use out of the tooling, and systems development doing nothing but getting more complicated. I mean, I think there'll come a point where it starts to get simpler, but it's just increasing in complexity. There's just, you've got to know a lot of stuff to be able to do things these days, like from Kubernetes to Prometheus and Terraform to deploy your infrastructure, and then software development as well. I mean, hey, there's so many different things. So I'd like to think that like my experience of just doing a lot of those things brings it together that because I was an engineer, I've been the person who's suffering at 2:00 in the morning trying to get something to work. I've been the person who struggles through the documentation and crawling forums and hitting the 10th page of GitHub looking for the magic answer. And I hope that gives me a little bit of empathy towards other people, and maybe I can explain things in a way hopefully helps them out and saves them a little bit of time and pain.
So last question, absolute last question. The future for Nic here, more in longs, do you see that this is kind of the role that you want to finish your career in, even if it's not at HashiCorp so much? Like, do you see yourself going back into maybe a more pure engineering mode, or do you think being this mentor coach is where you'd like to end your career?
So I can tell you my dream, and I don't know whether I'll ever achieve this or not, but I've got a plan. And my plan is that I'd like to go back to college, and I'd like to study a PhD in computer science, predominantly distributed systems. And I'd like to teach at university. So I'm hoping that at some point, because I'm not getting any younger, but I don't, I'm not old at the same time. Like, I think I'm still enthusiastic for the industry, but I'd like to save up a little bit of money and to go and to do that and teach the next generation of kids how to become software engineers and do it like formally through as I say, university. I'd love to do that. Like literally, that would be great. I had such a good time at university. I'd love to go back and be the educator.
I love that idea, Nic. You gotta make that happen, man. That first day in the classroom on university, just big smile.
But like at the same time, I'm very fortunate for where I am. So I'm not. I genuinely couldn't think of anywhere else where I'd rather work right now. I genuinely couldn't really think of a job that I'd rather do, and a team that I would rather work with. So I'm super lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I've been very, very fortunate, and I'm very thankful for every opportunity that everybody has ever given me in my entire sort of career. So like if the whole university thing doesn't happen, like, it would be terrible to retire from HashiCorp one day.
Gotcha. All right. I wish we had another hour, but we're out of time. So Nic, if anybody listening to your story wants to reach out to you, have questions, or they feel like they're on a similar track and just want to talk, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm on. I mean, probably publicly, maybe like Twitter or something. I am on Sheriff Jackson on Twitter. I'm also on the Gophers Slack, so people can ping me there, or the CNCF Slack, or if they want to just email me, I'm jackson.nic@gmail.com, and it would be be a pleasure. Like as I said, I think the key thing that we do as humans is that we've got to be thinking about the next generation. So the next generation are going to be better, smarter, and quicker than us. Our job is really to set them up for success. And if there's anything that I know that can help somebody else, I'm happy to spend the time and give that information away.
Thank you, Nic. I so much appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you, Bill. It's been real fun talking to you, dude.
So this is Bill Kennedy with the Ardan Labs podcast signing out. Please go and find Nic and reach out. He's an amazing human being. I love every time I get to talk to Nic. I learn something new. But this is it. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.